All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another session of the Beyond Access series. Tonight, we're joined again with Rethink Ed to continue our series on supporting students on the autism spectrum. So we're really excited for them to join us once again. Thank you, Christine, and thank you, Paula, for being here with us. Tonight, you'll have access to use the Q&A function to ask any questions that you have. You can ask questions throughout the session, and we have some dedicated time at the end. If you require captions, you can access those by clicking the CC button. And then I see that there's a couple of questions about dropping in the number for Spanish. I will do that in the chat for all of you. But other than that, without any further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Christine and Paula for tonight's presentation. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Jose, and thank you everybody for being here. I'll start off with a quick round of introductions for myself and for Paula, and then we'll jump into the topic of the evening, which is executive functioning skills and how we can support our children with strengthening their executive functioning skills. I will start with an introduction. My name is Christine Pennington. I am a BCBA, which is a board certified behavior analyst. I, in the past, have worked in school settings, in home settings, and community settings, supporting families and students diagnosed on the autism spectrum, and kind of really building ABA programs, applied behavior analysis programs, again, in the home, community, and school setting. I'm so lucky right now to be able to work with New York City schools. So we are able to do a lot of training and support in the classrooms of city schools, which has been a huge joy and something that is so passionate about and love doing. I have on with me this evening Paula Flanders, who is joining us. Paula has a lot of experience in the field of executive functioning, really supporting families, implementing these strategies in the home setting. And I will turn it over, Paula, to you to do an introduction as well.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Paula Flanders, as Christine mentioned. My background is in behavior as well. I'll be taking my test to be certified, as Christina is, as a board certified behavior analyst. My background is in special education, speech and language pathology, and communication deficits, behaviors on all across ranges. And I've dealt with a lot of students that had struggles with executive functioning. So as Christine mentioned, I've supported a lot of families and teachers inside the classroom setting with setting up their classroom to support those students struggling with those executive functioning skills.
And Paula is in worth noting. Paula is in North Carolina now, but is born and raised in the Bronx. So we thought only appropriate to have her on with us tonight for New York City. So with that said, let's dive into our topic of the night. Share screen will stop other participants. Yes, and Ori and Jose, I'm getting a notification as I'm going to share my screen that I haven't seen before. Starting screen share will stop other participants' computer sound share. Do you want to continue? Is it okay if I hit yes?
Yeah, it should be okay.
Great, thank you, Ori, appreciate it. Let me know if that has caused any issues with sound, both Paula, with you sharing out or with hearing me, please let me know. So with that said, I will jump into the topic of the evening, which is talking about executive functioning skills. So we're going to do a few different things throughout the series. So we're going to break down this term. You've probably heard this term before, executive functioning skills. So we're going to break down what does that mean. We're going to talk about some challenges we might see with our children, both at home, in the school setting, also in the community, and then talk about specific ways to support. I do also want to mention that either maybe prior to the session you have received or as a follow-up to the session, Jose will be sharing some resources that we have provided, some executive functioning support materials and strategies and resources. So those will be coming to you. And also I just want to mention as we go through this session today, we are going to be sharing a lot of different types of supports and strategies that you might want to try at home. I just want to make a note prior to diving in. Please take only what resonates with you. So as we share many different types of supports and strategies to try at home, I just ask that you please, whatever's connecting with you, whatever you know will fit into your home routine and will work for you, take those strategies and supports and feel free only to grab those that work best for you as we go through many different types. I just want to make that note. So with that said, we will dive into the session. So again, today we're going to talk about this term executive functioning skills. What does it mean? You've probably heard this term many times before. So we'll break down what do we mean when we say executive functioning skills. So we're going to be talking about mainly what are the main executive functioning skills. We're looking at things like organization skills, time management and planning skills, paying attention, staying on task, being independent. We're looking at skills to engage in self-regulation and coping. So we're going to break down what do we mean when we say self-regulation? We're referring to that set of skills. So we're going to break each of those areas further down to talk about different strategies and supports that we can implement proactively at home to support our children with strengthening their executive functioning skills. So as I mentioned, executive functioning skills are skills that help us with self-regulation, mental control, and they fall into those buckets of organization skills, time management, coping, self-regulation. So executive functioning skills are really important because these are the skills that help us stay focused, both for ourselves and for our children. So executive functioning skills are those important skills to help our child stay focused, to develop those independent skills, and to engage in self-regulation. So if something is stressful, those would be the skills that allow us to process that stress and to still move forward with a particular task in face of a stressful event. So again, we're going to break these down as we go throughout the session tonight. But when we talk about executive functioning skills, we're talking about an umbrella of different types of skills. And they are skills like time management, task initiation, our working memory, our self-control, our attention, and all of these skills work together to help with mental control and that self-regulation. So when we talk about executive functioning, we're really talking about a set of several different types of skills. Today, in today's session, we're going to talk about 5 in particular. We're going to talk about organization skills, time management and planning skills, our ability to pay attention and stay on task. We'll talk about independence, and then finally talk a little bit about coping and self-regulation. So we're going to break down each of these categories throughout the session. We're going to break down what how we can observe these skills in the home setting, and some challenges we might see in the home setting with our students, and then ways that we can proactively put supports in place. Throughout this session, my co-host Paula and I will be alternating sharing different strategies and supports. So you'll be hearing from both myself and Paula, who is really an expert in the field. So first, we're going to tackle organization. So what do we mean when we say organization? We all probably have a good idea already of what it means to be organized. So what does it mean to engage in these organization skills? It means that when we're looking at our physical environment, there's ways that we can definitely see that, right? So how do we know that we have an organized physical environment? Well, we know when there's when our items have places, when they have our designated areas where they belong. That's one way to show that kind of we're organized in the home setting. So if we walk in, do we have a place for our keys? If our child walks into the home, do they have a spot where they're putting their backpack, where they're unpacking their belongings, where they're taking out in a workspace to work on their homework maybe? So these would be all physical signs of organization, and in particular thinking about the home setting. So when we talk about organization, are there places for our belongings? Very simple. Are we able to locate our belongings when needed? Can we keep track of the important items? And importantly, in our organization systems, are we using them? So do we have these systems in place for our belongings? And then are we utilizing them? So are we putting things away after use? So organization, something that we all identify with. We're probably all reflecting on our own systems at home. And this is kind of one of those important areas of executive functioning. Am I able to develop those systems of organization? And then am I able to execute and stick with them? So we'll talk about where some of our children may experience challenges with organization. Of course, this wouldn't be unique to just our children. We all could experience and likely do experience some challenges with organization. But again, in this session, we're going to focus specifically on strategies and supports for our children. But where might we see some challenges? Certainly getting ready on time. If we struggle with organization, I'm sure that's relating to a lot of us now. We're trying to get out of the door quickly, but our child always needs that particular toy before we get in the car. But we've lost the toy, right? We all had that experience where it can significantly delay getting ready on time. Potentially, that might be a challenge of not having our belongings in a particular place where we know we can locate them quickly. We might have trouble completing tasks. Keeping areas neat, of course, we don't have an organizational system in place. Putting items in the appropriate place. So for our children, we might have these great systems set up, but they struggle to put items in the appropriate place. So that could be another challenge we might see at home. So if we are experiencing, again, there's a physical representation of how we see an environment, but we also have mental processes for each of these categories. So we might struggle if we have organizational challenges, we might struggle to tell a story in a logical way, right? So these are some challenges that we might see with organization, both in our environment and how they might manifest when we are even having a conversation. We might see some of these challenges with organization related to mental processing. So those are, that is an overview of what organization looks like. Some challenges we might see at home. I'm sure we're relating, a few folks might be relating to some of those challenges in the home setting. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to my co-host Paula, who will talk about some proactive ways to support with organization.
So when thinking about organization, what you really want to think about is think about those routines that you have in place at home for your child, as well as the structure and routine that they might have in school. So it'll be really important for you guys to work together with your teachers to find out how the processes are set up inside the school setting. And then you can see if the process that they have in the school setting will support the processes that you want your child to do at home. So what you're seeing right now on the PowerPoint is a checklist. Checklists work really well with helping students to get organized and follow routines. So identifying the routines that you might want for them to do at home, whether it's like preparing the table for dinner in the afternoon, or just understanding that it's time to get structured when it's time for them to get ready to go to bed and know those night routines. Those are things that you might want to create a checklist for your students, just so that they can get things done in the order that it should be done, to make sure that they're getting everything done, as well as not forgetting to do something and not missing out on an opportunity to get stuff done in a timely fashion. So another area that we're going to talk about is on this next slide, is also another form of a visual support. Having a point system for your student will also support them with being able to realize that there's structures in place and routines that they're going to follow, and it'll help them to work through getting things done. So with the point system, what you would do with your child is they'll be able to earn, with this one, you can notice that it has a point system where they're earning 2 points for doing specific items. You'll be able to identify different things that your child may like, and then you'll be able to use that to get them to stay on point with completing the structures that you put in place. Some students struggle with organization when it comes to getting projects done. And you'll notice that instead of them getting things done in a timely fashion, you'll notice that there's struggle with having it completed on time, which will go right along with the time management section that Christina is going to talk about next. But before we get to the time management section, she has one more slide that I wanted to share with you guys. And it's just like a brief way to think about how 3 main areas where you can think about when coming up with organization systems for your student. The first thing you want to think about is developing a system with your child that will work. So when I talk about having those routines in place, think about the routines that you have. For example, if it's something that has to do with home, and let's say your child does set the table, but prior to setting the table, your expectations are that they wash their hands and then get the dishes out, bring them to the table, set them a certain way. It might be something that you would sit down and you'll develop that system for how you would like to see that done with your child together. And then while they're doing it, you supervise them by giving them a friendly reminder that they did a good job with setting the table, or doing a good job with remembering to go ahead and do that first step of washing their hands. Another important thing is that with the students, you always want to remember to model those desired behaviors that you want from them. So if it's an expectation that you have of washing hands, you might want to model that you're going to start washing your hands first prior to asking them. And then sometimes you may not even need to remind them, because when they see you performing the behavior, then they will see that model behavior as an example and a reminder for them to do the same. Christine, if you want to go ahead with the next slide. So now Christine is going to talk some about time management. I like to think of all of the executive function and skills as partners. time management and organization really go hand in hand. And when we get into the later slides, and you'll notice with paying attention, each one of the areas, you'll see that they're very quite linked. And once you get the student, your child with working with one skill, you'll see that it follows over into the other skill area, and they'll develop a system, and you'll realize that all the areas are being strengthened together. Go ahead, Christine. Sorry.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Paula, for sharing out some strategies. I'm going to go back just a couple of slides because I apologize, Jose, but I am peeking at the Q&A, and I do want to go ahead and jump in and answer one great question, which is about the resources. So somebody asked, are we going to share out resources and checklists? And yes, that is exactly what's going to be included in the package that we're sharing with Jose. So we'll be sharing out some samples of checklists. So it's something that will look similar to what you're seeing here on the visual display on the screen. And I love, to your point, Paula, about even asking a teacher. Your child might have a checklist that he or she is using in school and already familiar with the format, and the teacher could simply send home the same checklist that your child's using in school, and that could be a great carryover, crossover, homeschool connection. So I love that idea, Paula, of even just asking your teacher if she's using any of these in the classroom. But absolutely, we'll be sharing a lot of different resources that will include checklists, visual schedules, and additional resources. And I want to go over to one other point, that these can also be very simple. So we will share some resources as a guide, but if you prefer just to jot these down on a piece of paper, that will also work. So really kind of going back to really what works best for you. But yes, we will be sharing some additional resources, both checklists and visual schedules, and just additional resources related to organization supports as well. So with that, I'm going to go into the next piece of this. And as I love that you said, Paula, so nicely, these are all going to work together really cohesively. And we're going to see, as we're working on one skill and we're building that skill with our child, we're going to see it spill over into these other areas. So I like that you highlighted that, Paula. That's a really nice connection. So next, we're going to talk about time management and planning. So what does it mean to engage in time management and planning? We all do this daily, right? So how are we managing our own time? A lot of us might rely on our Outlook calendar or our Gmail calendar as a way to kind of organize our time and structure our day, make sure we're getting to our most important tasks of the day. So what does that look like for our child? So if our child's engaging in time management, are they able to complete one or more daily routines within a given amount of time? So we want to think about what's an appropriate amount of time to get ready for school. So is it taking 30 minutes to get ready for school? Should that be happening a little bit quicker? So can we support our child to get ready and manage our time so they're able to complete a task or daily routine within a given amount of time? Maybe it should be taking 20 minutes or 15 minutes. Is our child building an appropriate amount of time to complete a task? So if we need to come home and complete our homework tonight, are we budgeting and we also want to play a video game with our friends and go out and play? Are we budgeting enough time, the appropriate amount of time to get our homework in? So that's another piece of time management and planning. This is something that I know is of course not unique to our children. We all, I think this is something that we all kind of need to work at, but are we starting long-term projects far enough in advance? So of course, when we think about our children, we really kind of think about those academic projects they're working on. So if we have a project that we're working on for our English class, we know it's a big project, it's a long paper. Are we starting it long enough in advance that we're able to work on it and plan and manage our time effectively and get it completed? And then are we able to make good decisions about priorities and prioritize time accordingly? So if we do have something if we are thinking again, connecting it back to classroom and academics, if we have something that is, we have a really big test tomorrow, do we know to prioritize our time to study for that test, and maybe a smaller project that's due later in the week? Are we able to prioritize how we should be preparing for our academics this evening effectively? So that we're prepared for the next day. So that's a little bit about what time management can look like for our children. Of course, we're also thinking about ourselves. What does that look like when we're managing our time? So this, of course, these skills span across not just for our children, they impact all of us. But going back to thinking about our children, what challenges might we see We've all probably seen this, right? Challenges completing all assignments. So if we have 3 assignments, we might have some challenges completing all of those assignments if we're not pacing them, not planning them out a correct amount of time for each assignment, and then pacing them accordingly, that long-term planning piece of it, giving enough time for assignments, and then correctly prioritizing play versus task, which I know can be challenging, but something to work on and something to be mindful of is also prioritizing our time. When is it time to play versus when is it time to accomplish tasks? And this is actually a very similar plan out my time sheet that we'll be sharing. Some of my favorite resources that we're sharing out to Jose and that you'll be receiving are actually around time management and time planning. A few resources for to manage schoolwork. So how are we prioritizing our schoolwork? So you'll also be receiving some specifically time management supports for planning out time to collaborate with your child to work on. And with that said, I will turn it over to Paula to talk about some specific strategies that we can incorporate to support our children with time management skills.
Right. And so planning can be a really big part of having a setback with your child if they are not aware that they're not planning accordingly. And a lot of times that's what we see, is that the students don't really know how to do the planning. I did notice that one of the questions I want to just support responding to that question is saying that your child was struggling with the free time. Free time is also something that you can plan for. So identifying those tasks that your child likes doing, or anything that's like a recreational thing that's okay for them to be doing, or if it's something that you might see that it's something that they could start setting up to be prepared for the next day during that free time, using these same lists and plans that Christine had up before. That was a really good example of one. The checklist that showed how you can plan out what you're supposed to be doing. You can have a plan for your child that's just planning for free time. So then that'll help them to know what they're supposed to be doing. And instead of it feeling like it's unstructured time, it'll actually be structured, unstructured time. So it'll support them with not feeling like there's nothing to do. And they'll always know what it is that they can do. They can go to that checklist and confirm what they should be doing once they finish doing an assigned task for work or for school. They might have something that's an unstructured thing that they're supposed to be working on that they'll see that they have outlined for them. That's a big thing that I've noticed with a lot of students that I've worked with, is that during that free time is when they usually get themselves in trouble, because they don't know what to do with the free time. They don't have an imagination to allow them to say, okay, I can go and start studying for tomorrow's test. So helping them to set up a plan for what they would do during unstructured time really saved them a lot of heartache, and it really helped them to feel in control of everything. So just going back to everything else that we were talking about, with the prioritizing is a really big thing as well. A lot of students find it hard to identify how much time is needed to be allotted for each task that's needed when they have a long project, or even if they have a short-term project that might be due within 3 days. So a big thing to do is that use a list to have the students write down the list of the projects that they have to do. And maybe you would sit with them and write on the calendar the due dates, and then have them use that as a visual aid, because having that visual reminder really makes a really great representation of seeing exactly how much time is allotted by seeing it on the calendar, seeing it on the paper written out. And then once they have that written out, what I did with one student before was we used his name to write down. So his name was Evan, and we would take the initials from his name, and we would use that to write down to order the projects from when it had to get done. So since E was the first letter in his name, the first project that needed to be completed would have an E on it. And then it would go so forth and so forth. Other strategies that work with students is maybe color coding things for them. And so like if they have a favorite color to their least favorite color, or even using numbers, a number system for them 1 to 5, and then you would go through and help them, support them with rating it or when it needs to get done. But with that being said, a really big important part for that, to make sure that they do stay on task, is setting up those mid checkpoints so that they can know that if something is due in 2 weeks, they shouldn't wait until the day before it's due, but maybe in 4 days, they would check in to see how much they've gotten completed, and then have a check-in partner. A lot of students that I've worked with prefer to work with peers. So we will do a buddy system where they had a peer that was their check-in partner, and some of them preferred working with their siblings. So a lot of them had a lot of brothers and sisters, and so they had picked a sister or a brother that was their favorite person or parent, and that person was their partner. So that was like their accountability partner. Like many of us need accountability partners just for us to do the things that we have to do as adults. with children as well, it helps them to have that accountability person that they trust and that they feel has confidence in them, to support them with just checking in and have that person to support checking in to make sure that they're on task with getting things done in a timely fashion. You can go to the next slide, Christine. So when thinking about organization and time management, as we both mentioned earlier, that they go hand in hand. When it comes to your students doing their homework, you might notice that you have teachers explaining that the child either turned the homework in late, or it was turned in and maybe it was incomplete. And all of that goes along with the student not having enough, not planning out the right amount of time for when they needed to start the homework. It also goes in line with students that have problems with initiating, starting their homework. So they may have trouble with getting focused and getting the homework done, which will go along with the next point that we're going to talk about. But having those visual aids in the form of a checklist or the routine and the color coding that you set up with them will help to keep them on task. I can't stress enough how important it is for you to find a buddy system with your child. So either if you're the person that they prefer working with and checking in with, for you to establish that relationship with them and let them know that you have a system that you have in place for yourself for times when you're going to be checking in with them to make sure that they're on point. And then maybe if it's something that you'd like to ask them to help you with checking in, just so that they can feel that it's like a partnership that you guys have, as opposed to them feeling like you're someone forcing them to do something that they might not feel like they want to do. It'll seem more like something that's engaging for them. And then eventually the students learn to self-regulate. When we get to that part, you'll see that with following through with these systems, when they get put in place, you'll see that your child is able to self-monitor themselves and be able to get these things done on their own. Okay, Christine.
Great, thank you, Paula. I jotted down two things that I love that you said that I just want to quickly highlight. One, going back to that leisure schedule. I think unstructured free time can be challenging to decide what comes next. And I love that you highlighted that these checklists and these visual schedules. So I know we had a few visual schedules up that we'll also share. And I believe one of the resources that we'll share will be a visual schedule for leisure time. But these visual schedules work really nice for leisure time as well. So we can either show a picture of what our leisure plan is. So maybe first we're going to read a book for 5 minutes. We could even set a timer, and then what comes next. So then we're going to work on the new puzzle that we got for 10 minutes, and then we're going to play 10 minutes or 20 minutes of our video games. We can actually put a visual schedule. And I like that you keep coming back to involving your child. So maybe we're going to have our child pick out the leisure schedule, and we'll do that together. But once we have it together, then they're going to be more independent because they have it in place. And I also like, to your point, having the check-in system, that when we have the check-in system and we're setting up a system where we're checking in with our child midway, I like your idea of also having the child check in on us. So it's the collaborative time that we are kind of working together. And I really just wanted to highlight those because I thought those were really neat ideas. So thank you for sharing out. So next we're going to talk about the skill of staying on task, paying attention. So of course, I just kind of break down what that will look like and then turn it over to Paula for some specific strategies and supports. So when we are paying attention and staying on task, what will this look like for our child in the home setting? How we will know this is happening? Is our child able to complete one or more chores with minimal distraction? Is our child able to complete homework assignments? Of course, with some breaks and assistance built in, but overall, are we getting our homework assignments done and accomplished and turned in for the next day? And then also staying on task, following multi-step instructions is a skill that, of course, requires paying attention to multiple steps and staying on task. So if we're seeing some of these things, these are good indicators that of course, that our child is paying attention and staying on task. So where might we see some challenges? Getting things done. So working memory. This is, of course, where we working memory. And also, Paula, I'll turn it over to you to break this term a little bit further. But this is where we store information. So if we have trouble with our working memory, we might have challenges, of course, paying attention or staying on task. If we have we might have fear of past failures. So there might be some challenges with taking initiative. So I might not stay on task. I might not pay attention in a specific subject because in the past I did really poorly on a test. And now I really don't like math. I am scared of going to math because I did really bad on that test. And so that kind of that fear of past failures might be a challenge for taking initiative, for paying attention and staying on task And this example, staying with it, would be in a math class. I'm struggling to pay attention or stay on task because I don't feel like I'm great at the subject. So that could be one challenge that we might see. And then, of course, when we might have challenges paying attention or staying on task is just lack of interest. There might be something that's more exciting. So those may be some areas that we might see some challenges with staying on task or paying attention. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to Paula to talk about some proactive supports to put in place to help support our children with paying attention and staying on task.
So one of the most important areas that I've noticed when it comes to staying on task and being focused is that we have to help our children to be aware that they aren't being on task and that they aren't focused. A lot of times the children won't realize that they're not focused or that they're not on task, that they've gotten off task from doing what they're supposed to be doing. So what I've done in the past with some students, when I noticed that it was something that had started becoming a problem with them and getting them behind in their work, we'd have a conversation about why they thought that they were getting behind in their work. And then sometimes they wouldn't know. Some would recognize and tell me that they just got distracted. So that was one of the primary things that was very important to me, was that when they were able to recognize that they were getting distracted, that now we can come up with those lists of things that are distracting to them. Sometimes sitting inside the classroom near their friends can be a distractor. Sometimes sitting near the door, sometimes sitting close to the board where they could hear the teacher writing could be something that's a distractor to a student. So being placed in the appropriately inside the setting help with students to alleviate those distractors for them, and then help them to become a little bit more focused. So with your children, it'll be good to come up with a list of the things that might be distracting them. If it's something that's distracting them, that's causing them to lose their focus, and maintain it. If it has to do with them just not being able to stay focused, to keep the focus, just because it might be something where it's lack of interest, like Christine mentioned, and or it's lack of drive to do the work, or motivation because they might feel that they've done poorly in the area or they're not interested in it, then that's something that you can arrange around supporting them in a different way. So with those type of tasks, you can support them by, again, I will not stress enough with how important it is to pair them up with a peer or a sibling, or even yourself, that they trust them and feels that they have confidence in them, because they will confide in that person and they will feel comfortable with letting that person know that they are struggling with that content or with that math, whatever it is, whatever the academic area is that they're struggling with, or even if it's a skill that they're working on, something that they're working on at home, as far as like maybe making their bed up or remembering to tie their shoes or tidy up their room. They will confide in that person to let them know that they forget to do the skill or what steps they forget. And then they can come up with a plan to help support them with building that skill from the home front, or building a skill from inside the academic setting, whether it's with math, and they might want to the teacher might be able to pair them with someone that's a little bit better at the math or more motivated to do the math, and be able to help them with that struggling area. So when it comes to attention, the first thing that you'd want to do is try to identify what the distractors are, and to try to bring awareness to your students so that the student is aware that it's happening. Once they have that awareness, another big area is for you to come up with some resource, with some tools for them to help them have strategies to get them back to being focused. Sometimes for some students, they work well with knowing that they're working towards a break. And for that, later you'll see a first then board that we have, that they know that they have to complete some assignments first, but they know that they're working towards getting that 5 or 10 minute break where they could play with a fidget spinner or something else that they like that's not distracting to other peers or is appropriate for whatever setting they're in. But identifying that they are getting unfocused will be the first thing that a first step into getting them to be able to work on building that focus up, because then they'll be able to identify that they're distracted. With one student, what I did in the past was have him mark off when he realized that he had gotten distracted, so that we can keep track of how many times he got distracted during the day. And then we started noticing what time of the day it was. We started noticing what was happening inside the environment. And then we set up resources for him and strategies to help prevent that and make changes for him. And that was successful for him. You can go to the next slide, Christine. So as I mentioned, we always are really big on pairing with siblings, or pairing with yourself or a friend. That'll help with supervision. Supervision doesn't always have to mean that you're like the parent hovering over them where you feel like that you're parenting, but it'll be more of like a partnership, and it'll help them feel like you guys are working together as opposed to you're working against them. And so providing supervision can mean just pairing them up with that person and having that person be their check-in buddy. and then they're a check-in buddy for that person as well. Visual cues are a really good reminder for everything when it comes to executive functioning. So you'll see that we mention them a lot. And then the main goal that we want to get them to is being able to self-monitor. So once your student understands that certain things distract them, they'll be able to advocate for themselves and say, I can't sit near the window because I get distracted by hearing the noise outside. And so then that means that they're monitoring their own environment and how their own body is responding to the stimuli that's presented to them. And so that's like the overall goal, is to get them to be able to self-monitor and then make those adjustments for themselves and advocate for what they need so that they can be productive.
Great. Is it?
So this is the first in chart that I had mentioned. And the first in chart is really good for students if they need, whether they need a picture or pictorial visual cue, or if they just need a word to say, like, I'm going to take a break and have a picture of the break or the word break on the sheet. For students that are just learning to try to remember that they're working towards something and to get focused, it works great for them to have this as a visual cue right in front of them and near them wherever their workstation is, or if they're in their room and they know they're supposed to be working on cleaning their room. And after each time they check off on the checklist after they've completed one part, they might have that then what they're going to be able to do next after they've completed the entire list of cleaning up their room or whatever it is that they're working for. Something else that I had wanted to mention, excuse me, is that with planning out, when you're planning out the stuff for your student, it's really important that they have these visual aids, and this will also support them with the time management. We know that children, they can see the list of things that we have set out for them, but having that visual reminder can also translate into time, so that it'll allow you to put a timestamp to let them see how much time it will actually take for them to complete a task. So if they know that, like, say, for example, we have up here that the student is working for Legos and he has to work quietly. And if he knows that it takes him maybe 5 minutes, you could put a timestamp of 5 minutes on how long it takes him to work quietly. And then for him to sit, it might take 2 or 3 minutes. At the end of that, he can add that up and see how many minutes exactly it is. And then that makes it easy for them to have a realistic set of time that they know that they're working for, to make it concrete for them to know how long it is that they have to actually work to get towards the goal that they have at the end, which is whatever the desired product is that they want towards the end. So these visual aids will really support your students with your children with doing the things that you need them to do, and just being able to self-monitor. The reward systems using the Tonkin boards are great, and you definitely want to remember to praise them. When we spoke earlier, we talked about giving the students those reminders about when they were supposed to be starting a task. A reminder doesn't have to be it's time for you to go do this, but it could just be something as friendly as, oh, I'll go ahead and set that reminder for you, that timer for you for 5 minutes. And when it goes off, you can, when it starts ringing, you can shut it off, and that'll be your reminder that it's time for you to start taking out the trash. So little things like that is something that we start, but then eventually you'll see that your child will start setting the timer for their reminder, or they'll ask you, is it okay if I set the timer for when I have to start working? Or can I set the timer for when it's time for me to start my break or end my break? And it'll be very productive.
Great. Thank you. Great suggestions and strategies. Well, I like that you keep coming back to bringing it to the child being involved. So I love those suggestions. I'll turn it over to you also for a breakdown of some age-appropriate chores to have in mind if we're working on paying attention and staying on task. Of course, these are not a list of skills that our children need to do by age, just a rough estimate of skills that might be appropriate by age bucket for working on paying attention and staying on task. But just wanted to give a few different ideas of what we might try kind of implementing at home with some of these supports and strategies. And I will pause here for you to take a look at the screen and take a look at maybe your child's age range bucket, but please feel free to look at the bucket before or after to get ideas of tasks that we might focus on supporting, putting some of these supports in place for at home. I'll also turn it over to you, Paula, on this this slide to see if you have anything to add in here.
Yeah, so I would encourage everyone to just keep in mind that age is relative. So we know that when we have our children and they may have areas that they're struggling with, not all children do things at the same age. So this is like it's a range that we put in for things. But if you see that you're looking at it and your child is not Like let's say your child is 12, but he's not doing the things that's listed under the 12-year-old slot. That means that you can go to the 7 to 11, or you can even start with 2 to 3 if your child's not doing any of the things that are on this list because they haven't been required of, like maybe you haven't required them to do these things, but you want to start building rapport with them and getting them to have routines at home. You can pick items from anywhere on this list that are things that you know that are things that they're capable of doing, and something that you could either work with them or a peer could work with them or a sibling and get them to do. And then this could be part of your structured routine that you start developing. And it's just a nice list to have. So we try to put it in age categories just to make it where it's easiest things that could be done to a little bit harder, more difficult things. That's what the age ranges are for. It's not to say that when your child is 12 years old that they have to be able to do the list that's up here that you see for the 12-year-olds. It's just to give an idea of some of the basically really the difficulty level for the student, for the child age group. But if you don't see anything that's on here that your child's able to do right now, there are other things that are around your house. Since we know that you guys know your children best, you can think of things around the house that they can do. And then that's what you can make a list of routines that you can start developing for them to do, just for them to build that habit of being able to attend to a task for a certain amount of time and to follow the structured routine. So that way that will carry over into other things in life that you expect from them.
Great. Thank you, Paula. All great points. So with that said, and I do want to make a note of time for us, Paula, we have about 6 minutes before we open up our Q&A. So we will wrap up independence and coping and self-regulation. And then it looks like we have just a couple of questions in the Q&A to open it up to. So the next bucket that we're going to talk about is being independent. So those independent skills are an important part of our executive functioning skills. So what does it look like for our child to be independent? We want to look for things like, is our child initiating tasks independently throughout the day? Is the child getting their own snack ready or getting ready for school independently? Are we seeing some independent initiation of tasks throughout the day? Is our child completing daily routines and assignments? If we do have those great visual supports and reminders in place, that is totally great, but the main thing we're looking for is, even if we're using those visual supports and those reminders, are they helpful? And are we seeing the end goal here, which is our child completing daily routines and assignments independently, or of course with the use of the visual supports and reminders? Is our child, this was a great question that came up earlier in the session, is our child able to fill downtime with a chore or leisure skill? And if not, we've already kind of touched on some ways we might think about building out maybe something like a leisure schedule, collaborating with our child and coming up with a list of things we can do to fill our free time, and then putting that down on a list and following that list can help our child be independent with things like downtime, leisure skills. Where may we see some challenges with independence? We may see some challenges with initiating and completing tasks. So if we find ourselves giving a lot of reminders, okay, remember, did we take out the trash? Did you do your homework? Did we pack up our bag? That might be an indicator to us that it might be a skill that we want to support our child with. So are we seeing our child initiating tasks and completing tasks independently? If not, that could be a good indicator that it might be a skill that we can teach. Is our child, once we get our child started with a particular task or they start independently, do we have confidence that they'll complete it? If we're not seeing that, again, a good cue for us that it's a skill that we can work on at home. Building and maintaining confidence. So we might see some challenges with maybe a skill or maybe a routine is a little bit too difficult. Maybe it was maybe we are aiming to make a meal, and it's a task that might be a little bit too challenging. So we might see challenges in building and maintaining that confidence, being independent if a child is struggling. So again, that might be one challenge that we'll see. Paul will talk about some ways we can proactively support. And there might be some challenges with taking on more responsibility. So a little bit of pushback with being independent with some of these tasks. And again, we'll turn it over to Paula now to talk about some specific strategies and supports that we can put in place to address these challenges.
So with building independence, there was a question that we'll go into about if a child is nonverbal and having issues with focus. I just want to address that really quickly before we get started on independence, and it'll be really quick. So with students that are with your child being nonverbal, they still can understand and they still are able to communicate with you. So whatever communication methods that you're using with that child, you can still use the same methods that we're sharing for children that are verbal. So if you're creating a checklist and you're talking with your child, you might have like pictures or something that you're using for the child, like a PEC system, or you might have a communication book that the child uses to communicate with. Within that communication book, you'll be able to create the same structured checklist and system for your child using the same thing. And that'll support them with being able to get focused. Using a timer to help them with reminding them that they're supposed to be on task with doing something, and using that first then structured board will help them as well. So the same systems that you would put in place for a child that's verbal is what you could use for a child that's nonverbal. And I hope that answers that question. When we're talking about independence, and we're going to go into coping skills and self-regulation, it's important that we build the skills, the strategies and skills up front. And when you have those developed, you will have your students, what will happen is you'll transfer from you being a support system with helping them to create the system to showing them how they can create those systems on their own. And a great way for doing that is that after you've worked with your child to create the system in a partnership with them, then eventually you would transfer over and ask them to go ahead and create a system. And the best way to start is by having them to create a system for maybe just the afternoon part of the day, and ask them to write down what it is they need to be doing for the afternoon. And then you would build that up and have them creating the system for the entire day, and just have them show you what their plan is for the day of what they're supposed to be doing. Maybe like if it's something that has to do with like the weekend, like a Saturday or a Sunday, to have the structured system in place to come and show to you and then bring it to you. And you can do a checklist similar to what you have up here on the board now, is broken up of the student's goal for the month of what they're supposed to be doing. This is a long-term goal that you would have for your student, but starting off with just having them to show you what they plan to do for just the afternoon part of the day or the morning part of the day, and then going through that process with them and helping them to make corrections or any modifications that are needed is a great way to start. So this is also something that can be done with a sibling or a peer. I can't say that enough, because students work so much better with their peers than they do with us as adults. They look up to their peers and they prefer to get the support from them. And the peer or sibling that's working with them, if they're not struggling in that area, they will come to you to ask you for support that they can use to help their sister or brother. I've seen it on so many fronts with students where they come to ask me as the teacher for help on how they can help another student, but they wouldn't come to ask for the help for themselves. So pairing up with someone else that they trust is going to be a big help, from whether it's in the home or if it's inside the school setting, asking their teachers to do that same thing. It'll help them with developing the skills that they need to be able to self-monitor themselves. Okay. Can you go to the next one?
Sure. And we are getting a reminder from Jose, 10 minutes. Just want to mention that, Paula.
Okay. And so just with this one, is just reiterating about setting up to set them up with opportunities for them to show that they're independent. So this part would definitely fall on you as the parent to be aware of the areas where you see that they are strong at, and then set those opportunities up for them to be successful. And then remember to praise them right after they've done something that was wonderful, even if it was just slightly better. You want to praise them and give them all that praise so that they can build that confidence, because with confidence comes more independence, and it'll also brings more trials for them to make more either mistakes or corrections and continue to do what they're doing to improve that skill. And that also goes with identifying the barriers. So if you know that they're struggling in a specific area, you might want to make sure that you're setting it up to make it where it's something that they won't have as a barrier or see it as a barrier by giving them the extra additional supports that they need. I think I spoke to praise and task initiation.
Yes, and I will quickly cover that point because I think this is a great point. Praising, just trying. So if our child is maybe tried to make a snack and it was a little bit messy and it wasn't perfect, but they tried and they needed a little support, we can always praise that initiation. Wow, I love how you independently went and got all the materials. Okay, let's do the rest together. So we're praising that initiation. And it doesn't have to be perfect. A lot of times, sometimes that perfectionism can prevent our child from even wanting to try. So I love this idea of praising, even just initiating that task independently. So last bucket we're going to touch on, so important, coping and self-regulation. A lot of great information in here. We'll just quickly highlight, what do we mean when we say coping and self-regulation skills? What does that look like? So we're really talking about controlling impulses, being flexible, and these are things that help us manage challenging tasks. So if we have all probably can relate to this experience that something very stressful happened, how does that impact us? So we encounter a stressful event. This is part of life. We're all going to experience stress at some point. So how does that impact us? When we're experiencing that stress, are we able to self-regulate, calm down our body, acknowledge that we're feeling stressed, and then move on with the day, move on and engage in challenging tasks? So coping and self-regulation are those really great skills that help us to calm our body and if we're experiencing a moment, to see past that moment and to move forward with engaging in challenge in tasks that might be really challenging for us. So these are really great, really important skills. If we are experiencing challenges in coping and self-regulation, that's going to have, we can see a lot of pretty impactful ways that represents in our lives. Where might we see some challenges? This could really be a challenge in maintaining relationships, right? If we have trouble regulating our emotions, calming down when something stressful happens, then we might have difficulty maintaining relationships over time, building those friendships. If we are having really big reactions and we're not able to calm our bodies down. Accepting feedback down the road, certainly accepting feedback is something that we all need to do as part of living our daily lives. If we are experiencing some challenges with coping and self-regulation, it might impact our ability to accept feedback from teachers, from peers, down the road, our employers, of course, and then rationalizing when a problem occurs. So these coping and self-regulation, such an important skill. We do have some, hopefully you find them helpful resources that we'll also be sharing in our follow-up packet. And with that said, we have just a few more minutes left, Paula. Any final talking points, important ways, key ways to build these coping and self-regulation skills?
So I definitely would still say that I emphasize the importance of having, like, using the checklists, utilizing that for the students. It's with coping and self-regulation, it's really big of being aware of the space and environment that you're in and how your body responds to the things, to the stimuli cues that's happening inside that environment. So it'll be big for you to have your child start to be aware of how they're feeling at different times, and just identifying those feelings and the time of the day or whenever it's happening. So if they're having a difficult time and being impulsive during the start of a test, it'll be good for them to recognize that maybe they have testing anxiety. Maybe the knowing that they're going to take a test is what's causing them to be impulsive and have those behaviors. So other things that you might see also might be students that are calling out. That's another form of impulsive behavior that requires learning to regulate yourself, as well as interrupting is another area that I've noticed that a lot of students struggled with. And so just coming up with a system for those students of being able to write down, because what I found was that a lot of them mentioned that they called out, some of them called out just because it was an impulse, but some called out because they felt like they were going to forget what they had to say. And that goes along with the working memory. So your working memory is what helps you to hold on to what it is that you want to say, and hold on to that information long enough so that way you can process it and then give it back when you're supposed to give it back. For students that struggle with executive functioning, they realize that they can't hold on to it long enough, so they will interrupt so that they can get their thought out before it leaves their mind. So for students like that I've worked with, what I've had them doing is using index cards to write down a keyword so that they could remember what it is that they wanted to say, or jot down like a quick note. And then that way they could use the appropriate procedures that's in place in the classroom, such as raising their hand. And then once they raised their hand and they got picked on, their thought wasn't gone because they had preserved it on an index card for them to be able to use later. So it'll be important for them just to be aware and have those processes in place to help them with coping strategies, and just to really being aware. It's really about being aware, and that's something that they'll have to work on with you, and it'll be something that you'll have to work on with them. Before I say this last thing I just wanted to mention is that Christine mentioned about the feedback part. The feedback part is very important for you to start ingraining by when talking to them. We have something that we use what we think that is called the sandwich method. And it's really important that when you're working on things with them that they are doing well, that you do give them feedback on something that they could start to work on for the next time that you guys work on that skill. Because by you starting to do that with them, from no matter what age they are, when they're getting feedback from other adults and other people in their life, they won't receive it as criticism. They'll receive it as a building block, because you've already set the precedent for them by setting it up that way to let them know that, yes, you did this great, but there is always going to be something that you can work on for the next time, and it is okay. So I did just want to share that part. So yes, go ahead.
And I think, Paula, we have 2 minutes left. So I think we kept an eye on the chat and hopefully got to some questions throughout. So I apologize that we won't have the full Q&A session. I hope we address questions throughout. With that being said, I want to be sensitive to everybody's time and wrap up within our hour. So we have 2 minutes left. Final thoughts. I just want to also let you know we're sharing a When I Feel I Can board. So with self-regulation and self-coping, really want to label our feelings, talk about accepting our feelings. It's okay to feel that way. And then talk about, okay, if we are feeling stressed, what are different strategies you can come up with at home? Maybe it's counting to 10, maybe it's taking a breath. Come up with what works for you in your home setting to kind of to stop and identify when we might be getting upset, and then what are strategies you want to try at home to practice with your child. Okay, we're getting stressed out. What can we do? Maybe take 10 deep breaths. Maybe count to 10. So free, cheap, easy things at home. All things that we love to do to try to build those coping and self-regulation skills. With that said, we are right up to our time. I will yield to you, Jose. It is, I know, 8:29. We will stay on if there's questions, but I know it's been an hour. So I'll turn it over to you. And thank you for having us.
No, thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing information with families. I think there's no rush because, surprise, surprise, Christine will be back with us next week for the final session on supporting autism and closing out the 2021 year with us for Beyond Access. Getting a lot of thank yous in the Q&A. So thank you for sharing. And thank you also for talking about the importance of self-regulation, because I think that it tees up for a great opportunity that, even though we have one more session where we think, when we come back in January, we're gonna meet with an occupational therapist, and who is gonna talk to us about the way of using movement to help self-regulation, things like yoga and those types of things. And she's going to talk to us a little bit about the science behind it and how that helps. So it's great. It was a great tee up. So folks, next week, Rethink is back with us. And what's the topic for next week, Christine?
So next week, we're going to talk about proactive behavior supports.
So proactive behavior supports, and it's going to tie it all together. So we've talked about positive reinforcement. We've talked about schedules. So it's going to end up being a great series. So don't forget to register for that and hold your questions. Ori has said this to a couple of folks in the Q&A, but yes, all of the resources that Rethink talked about, we're going to share them with you all. So you have access to them, and just look out for an email from us tomorrow with the link to the recording of this session and those resources. So with that being said, thank you again to the folks from Rethink for joining. Christine, Paula, really appreciate it. Thank you for all the families who joined, and don't forget to check out our session next week. And until then, stay safe. Have a great night, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.